This is the Russini Report. With the Athletic Senior NFL Insider, Dianna Russini.
Welcome to the Athletic Football Show. I'm Robert Mays. Joining me for this week's edition of the Russini Report, it is our senior NFL insider here at the Athletic, Dianna Russini. Dianna, how are you?
I love that you use the word dishin because it's so ironic because I didn't get a dish on Thanksgiving. I had Thanksgiving in Philadelphia with my in-laws, and it was so busy and crazy. I never actually sat and ate, and I was angry about it for like 4 days. And so yesterday, please don't judge me. Please don't, because I know you're so high class when it comes to your food.
That's not true at all. I just want you to have a great meal on Thanksgiving. It just makes me sad that you weren't able to.
It's terrible. And so yesterday, I'm like, I'm just going to go to, can't even say it. I'm just going to go to Boston Market and just get a lunch and sit there and feel like I was part of the rest of the world eating, or at least the United States eating Thanksgiving. So that's what I did
for my at the Boston Market.
I spent my Monday at Boston Market in Ridgewood,
I'm just imagining you sadly eating alone in a booth at the Boston Market, but that's neither here nor there. At least you had a better week than Frank Reich and the entire Panthers organization. We can safely say that. So let's kick off our dive here into the NFL news with the biggest news of the week so far, and that is Frank Reich being let go by the Carolina Panthers 11 games into his tenure, one of the bigger kind of coaching carousel dominoes that's going to fall this year. What was the reaction when you reached out to people around the league and how they're processing the very quick hook that Frank Reich got in Carolina?
A lot of people were stunned. They were shocked. And these are people that have been in the NFL for a really long time, and they understand how cutthroat and competitive this league can be, yet no one truly thought that ownership would sever ties with Frank Reich after just such a short period of time. Now, that being said, everyone is aware that David Tepper has been known for meddling a bit and has moved on from coaches in the past in all of his sporting franchises. So the surprise was because it was just so early in the year here, Frank not getting a lot of time to work with Bryce Young. But I can tell you, the wheels are really in motion for weeks here. And when I started to talk to people outside the Panthers organization even 2 weeks ago, sharing that I had heard that maybe that they were going to move on, that was when I was getting the most reaction of, are you kidding? They're really going to make this move in season with a coach on the first year of a 4-year deal? And David Tepper made that decision. Now, it wasn't all negative either in terms of the feedback that I received around the league in terms of this decision, right? Surprise, yes. Shock, But there were some that believed that this was actually a really good move. Pull the Band-Aid now, move on. You didn't see what you want. You don't see improvement. And improvement is the word that I think we really have to emphasize here when it comes to how David Tepper was looking at this. This is what he wanted to see. He was okay with some struggles out of the gate. It's the fact that he never saw the offense get better, Robert.
Yeah, there was no tangible improvement whatsoever. When we hit on this a couple weeks ago, I think your stance and your framing on it was if things don't get better there, this was likely the outcome, and things certainly aren't getting better. So there was really no tipping point in your mind then that pushed this over the edge. It was more just the gradual kind of offensive malaise that we had seen really since Frank Reich took over there.
It was a lack of energy from the coaching staff as well, I was told. When you looked at the sidelines and you saw how they were contributing, and those are small little parts of a big, big puzzle and a big picture that was part of what this team was or is even, but that was stuff that was important. It was identifying who they wanted to be, understanding the culture that Frank was installing, and it wasn't catching on. Now, that being said, ownership had always been really content, happy with the defense, special teams. That was the part of this team that they were okay with. It was really just the fact he wanted to see the Bryce Young we all saw at Alabama. He wanted to see pieces of that offense installed in the Panthers offense, and he never got that. And we never got that. And look, there are also problems with their offensive line. We saw, especially the interior. lots of issues here. But in terms of the simple fact that the quarterback wasn't getting better and then also picking up on really bad habits, this is something that David Tepper saw with his own eyes, which is why you saw and heard about his frustration after they lost to the Tennessee Titans, a team that is also struggling this year and is not very good. And they lose to them. And he obviously used the F word as he left the locker room. And then we saw Frank Reich get fired the next day.
It's funny how things change and how fast they change in the NFL. During training camp, it was being framed as a positive that Frank had come in and kind of instilled more of an NFL, we're going to respect the players, we're going to be a little bit more lax sort of culture. Days aren't going until 8 p.m. Guys have a little bit more free time. And then now we get to Thanksgiving when the team isn't winning, and that lack of energy or maybe kind of a lack of urgency becomes a negative thing. Before the season started, when this staff was hired, think about all of the ink spilled about how much of a positive it was that they went out and they got Thomas Brown and Josh McCown and all these guys who had been hot names at Giro Evero for one reason or another in coaching cycles over the last couple of years. Part of the reason that Frank Reich got this job is because of the staff he could promise, David Tepper and leadership there. And now that staff has been completely dismantled. So all of the positives that were supposed to come along with this regime ultimately become negatives for one reason or another. And now we find ourselves here in late November being in an almost unprecedented situation for how quickly this fell apart.
And I don't want to brush over one of the best points you've made on this show before when we first reported that Frank Reich was in trouble, which was the fact that this coaching staff was put together with all different types of backgrounds and different experiences and different offenses. And they were supposed to mix and they were supposed to all come together and form what was supposed to be an offense out of the gate that was going to be successful. And it never happened. It never came together. And I think that there were things that were being asked or brought up or suggested that Frank didn't want to do. And either way, whether it was Frank's decision to do it the way he wanted to do it, or perhaps maybe taking some of that feedback, trying that, none of it was working. And now he's moved on, and now this team has moved on, and we'll see if Frank winds up perhaps maybe with the Eagles, or if this is really going to be it for him. But really, David Tepper making this decision, making it this early in the season, I think will be one of the more shocking stories of the year.
So now what happens? Because them doing this so quickly and them seeming as dysfunctional as they seem from the outside, I'm sure a lot of people believe that. How is this going to affect their reputation throughout the league? And more importantly, what the process now looks like for the next head coach that you may have to go above and beyond for, whether it be financially, the full court press that you have to put on to convince them to come into this situation.
Yeah, he's definitely going to have to supply these coaching candidates with some sort of certainty that the leash won't be as short as it was with Frank, because otherwise, why would a head coach want to take the job? And look, this is something that I think sometimes fans forget or they don't realize because they're not in the circles. But I can tell you, most coaches will do anything to get that opportunity, whether that means that they're going to be fired after one game or, they're going to have the longest leash in football. So I don't think there's going to be a question of coaches not wanting to take it. I just think there's going to be coaches there with choices. And coaches like we're seeing, I think Ben Johnson's going to be one of the hottest names, the offensive coordinator in Detroit, for this job. And that's just an opening we're seeing now. There's going to be more openings at the end of the season. And he's going to probably have multiple opportunities. And we'll see where he winds up going. But he had met with the Panthers before and turned it down and decided to stay with Detroit. So maybe there was something there that he'd already picked up on. Maybe he didn't even like the owner. And Tepper makes it very clear the type of organization he wants. And this is just based on talking to people who not only know him, but have met with him. So he's very clear with the vision and he is very hands-on, and that's how he runs it. And if you're okay with that, then you sign up. But look, Robert, I think another element to this that a lot of people don't really want to focus on is you see CJ Stroud having so much success And it's not about the Panthers taking the right guy or the wrong guy. It's the fact that there's another rookie quarterback out there who may be the best rookie quarterback we've seen since Dan Marino. And you have the number one overall. And Bryce Young does not look good, right, at this point, right? I like to think he could get better. But for right now, I think we can all agree he does not look like the number one overall pick.
This job is less appealing than it was at this time last year.
Correct.
Because now you've tied yourself to a quarterback who has struggled, and maybe he looks better in different circumstances. We've seen so many guys have terrible rookie years. Things get a little bit better. Jared Goff, I think, being the best example, where it looked like Jared Goff was completely unworkable in 2016. Sean McVay comes in. Jared Goff looks like a very different player. We'll see if Bryce Young can follow a similar path, but you're locked into this quarterback. You have no first-round pick next year to kind of be a consolation prize for the season that you've had. And we're going to be on shaky ground with whoever the general manager might be. So there's just so much more. There's a combination of more certainty and more uncertainty in the worst possible combo here in terms of how this job feels on November 28th of 2023 versus how it felt on January 1st of this year.
Yeah, and the comparison everyone's been making lately, and it makes sense, is when, you look at the draft class with Justin Herbert and Tua, and Brian Flores and Tua doesn't look like it works, isn't it? Tua's not great. Oh my gosh, they should have went for Justin. You get the right coach, you get the right understanding, you get a coach that understands the type of teaching he needs, and all of a sudden it starts clicking, which is why you heard David Tepper talk about their belief in Bryce Young. And I don't think, and I don't believe, and I can tell you just from my conversations with the organization, I do think it's a genuine feeling that he's still really good. He just needs to be partnered with the right coach.
So we know that Bryce Young is going to be there. We know that he is going to be part of this team's future. We can't say the same, I think, about Scott Fitterer, their general manager, and whether he's going to be around. Everything that has happened here, what sense do you have about Fitterer's future with the organization, whether or not a new GM is going to be part of this process heading into next season?
Yeah, the local media didn't get a lot of time with Tepper today. They had a little bit of an opportunity, and I know the question was asked, and it didn't get answered. And I do think that's going to be the biggest question mark of whether or not Scott Fitterer finishes, because he's also culpable in all of this in terms of some of the picks that they made and some of the decisions that they've made on the roster. This is now his third head coach here since he's been the general manager. So, look, you have to look at it from an ownership perspective, I think, through the lens of Tepper at this point. He probably is going to want somebody with some football experience in that front office right now until they can get through this season and start meeting with new head coaches. But I can tell you that they are also taking a look at Tepper and making a decision on whether or not they want him to be part of their future.
Be a lot easier of a blow if you had those extra first round picks from a Brian Burns trade right now, or one of 3 or 4 other kind of untapped deals or unopened doors that the Panthers have faced over the last couple of years. But a lot of stuff, a lot of intrigue to follow there moving forward. Let's talk about another situation where a coach and a GM might be a little bit on the hot seat, and that is the New York Jets. They play a national game on Black Friday. Everyone gets to watch a very public failing, another public embarrassment on offense. I can't imagine that ownership is loving the state of things over there. What sense do you get about the job security that Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas have right now?
Well, before we see the main show of the offense failing, we see the pregame warm-up show, the sidebar show, right? We see the Aaron warm-up, and we all dissect every movement he makes to try to figure out whether or not he's going to come back. And the reason why I went right to Aaron when you asked me about the staff is because it's connected, right? So everything in the Jets organization has to have the blessing and understanding and approval of Aaron Rodgers. They are empowering their quarterback. They are making sure that he's part of all of this. And it's all on purpose. And this has been like this since the recruiting of Aaron Rodgers began in the offseason. And this is how the organization feels that they can get, at least achieve the most success that by having him have a lot of control. And I think going back to when he was healthy, it was a really good move. It was smart. You saw a difference in the Jets. You see it. You saw it on the field. You saw it in the locker room, and it was contagious. You were with me on the sidelines for a few of those practices where we saw the power of Aaron Rodgers' skill set and leadership. But now he's not there every day. He's not part of the team at that same level as a starting quarterback. But it doesn't matter because it's all about making sure he's happy for next season, making sure he wants to return, which he does. And I think this coaching staff, as long as Aaron likes Robert Saleh, as long as he wants Robert Saleh to be the head coach, as long as he wants Nathaniel Hackett to continue to call plays, as long as he wants general manager Joe Douglas to continue to manage his team, then these men are safe.
They're in the Aaron Rodgers business now. That has been very clear since all of these moves started rolling in. And without him, it obviously looks horrible, right? The fact that Allen Lazard was inactive last week, some of these Aaron-centric moves that they have made have really burned them in the short term. The question now becomes, is it worth the long-term investment? Is it going to be so much better next year with him that all of these personnel failings that we've seen and all of these issues that have been rooted in the power that they've granted him, is it going to be worth it in the long run? That is a risky bet, because if it's not, then you're looking at a disaster season that just unfolded and potentially another disaster season coming around the bend. But if they can convince Aaron Rodgers and convince ownership that we deserve another crack at this with the guy that we made all of these concessions to, I understand that a little bit, but what's happened in the interim, I think, has to really let everyone know that they are on pretty shaky ground here moving forward.
Yeah, and I've been critical of the Jets having this tone to them of, well, we lost Aaron. What do you want from us? But when you start to understand why they feel that way, it makes sense, because everything works when Aaron is there.
It wasn't just the quarterback. It was everything else around him. If he's not involved in this process, then the process doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And you can fault them for that. You can fault them for having such a tenuous, fragile approach to all of this, where if a 40-year-old quarterback gets banged up, everything else then starts to fall apart. But that's what they did. That he was the load-bearing quarterback in this structure that the Jets built this season. And when you take that out, everything else falls apart.
It's exactly why they want the fans to understand, look, we're doing our best. It doesn't work without the blood, though. And the blood is Aaron Rodgers. We'd have no blood, And so they're hoping that when he comes back, which he went on the Pat McAfee show just a little while ago and said he is going to make sure he's healthy. And depending on where this team is in terms of the playoffs. And obviously we know statistically it's going to be a very, very, very long shot. They need a lot of help in order for them to make it. So I think it's pretty safe to say at this point, we're probably not going to see Aaron Rodgers on the field this season.
That has to be the right move. If all of this now hinges on what you do in 2024, why would you ever jeopardize what next season can look like by rushing him back when you don't really have a realistic shot at the postseason?
It would make no sense. And
everything about this just seems like it has been for a lot of show and a lot of, hey, I'm doing my best to get back there, when in reality, I can't imagine even the slimmest of chances that we see him before the end of the year.
Yeah. It reminds me of, when people go through stuff in their life and they just start posting all these pictures on their Instagram of like, hey, I'm still here. Like, we didn't forget about you. Don't worry. Like, Aaron,
no, how could we?
About you. We know who you are. We know you're the greatest quarterback in the game outside Patrick Mahomes right now. Like, it's cool.
Well, we'll see what happens, but it's been one, awful season. And I think that if they don't kind of get some return on this investment and this plan doesn't end up coming together next year, then it's going to be kind of an all-time blunder in the way that they've handled all of this, even if it probably was the right move at the time. Let's hop over to the other team that shares MetLife Stadium with the New York Jets, and that is the New York Giants. We've heard a lot of rumblings this week about the relationship with Brian Daboll and Wink Martindale, and whether it's devolved a little bit since the heights that they reached last year, making the playoffs and everything, really seeming like they were on the same page there. How do you feel like this relationship does exist right now? How do you feel like the feeling in the building, and what do we think is the ending of all of this here at the end of the season?
I think Robert Saleh gave the Giants like a couple $1 million and was like, here, start a fight. Do anything to take the heat off my team. Here's a box of donuts. Go at it. Because according to Brian Dable, the only thing that they fight over is the last slice of pizza, and they've fixed this relationship over a donut on Monday morning. Look, you have two very alpha strong men that have egos, and look, offense and defense is never going to get along, especially Rex Ryan type tree, the whole Buddy Ryan, that whole group, that they run their mouths. That's just their style, right? And so I wouldn't expect them to all get along on the practice field. The concern is that there's something going on here. This isn't just smoke where they're losing. So, just all the ugliness starts coming out. There's teeth to this. And I'm not sure how this is going to end. Is this a situation where at the end of the year, they say, look, this isn't working for us. We have a different personality. We don't see you being, part of the future here. Why don't we just agree to move on together? And it's just, fair game. Is it a firing? If it's that bad, I don't know if it's that bad behind the scenes, but let's say perhaps maybe it is. Is this something where the Giants want to nip it in the bud and just say, you know what, we're just going to move on? It's not really the Giants' way, though. That's not really their style. If I had a guess right now, it would be, if they were to part ways, it would be at the end of the season. But obviously that's not a good building. If the defensive coordinator and your head coach aren't getting along when he hired him. Remember, Brian Dable didn't hire his friends, right? That was something he was praised for. He went with who he thought was the best in those roles. So I think there's going to be more to the story as this season wraps up here.
Similar to the Panthers, where this was framed as a positive coming into the year, where Frank Reich hired all of these people from the outside and he built this staff, and they were trying to sell that incredibly hard. And this was the exact narrative last year with the Giants. And when things were going well, it's a positive. When you show some humility and really some thoughtfulness in how you build the staff, and I'm going to bring in people with different backgrounds, and I'm not just going to have my buddies all around. Well, when things go south and you start losing a bunch of games, then that lack of relationships and just that tenor of the building can potentially go south in a hurry, especially when we're dealing with some more volatile personalities, we'll see. And so I think that's exactly what has transpired with the Giants. And what happened in Baltimore is that they came to a mutual parting of the ways. That's how it was framed when Wink Martindale left the Ravens. So you think that's probably the more likely outcome here by the end of the season?
Yeah. And my bigger criticism is really how Joe Schoen handled it in the press conference. I mean, he knew it was coming. He knew the media was going to ask him what's going on between Wink Martindale and your head coach, Brian Daboll. And it looked like he heard the question for the first time ever. I don't understand how that works, but an easy answer could have gotten them right out of it. But now there's obviously so much smoke around this, and this is why I think the story is just going to continue snowballing.
Let's hit a couple quick personnel things before we get out of here. Shaq Leonard released by the Colts last week, kind of a face of the franchise sort of figure over the last few years there. What is the latest on where he might land after passing through waivers?
All right, let's just start with, he's in Dallas right now, actually, as we speak. Dallas is motivated to try to keep him. They're going to try to make sure he doesn't leave in typical free agent form. But the Philadelphia Eagles are swirling. They don't have an actual visit set up just yet, but they're hoping that Leonard gets out of the building there so they can bring him in for a visit and eventually sign him. And that's the hope. And there are other teams poking around on it, just kind of watching to see how this all comes together. Teams like the Minnesota Vikings, I know, had some conversations about perhaps bringing him in. I'm not sure if that's changed after last night's game. I haven't spoken to anyone there today, but I know he was certainly on their radar. And look, this is a disruptive player that was really impactful before those injuries, right? And I mean, he was the kind of guy, I remember players telling me, you need to know where he is on the field because he causes problems, right? 7 forced fumbles back in 2011. Excuse me, 2021. He's not that old. He's not the same guy though. He's not. But But I understand why a team like Dallas would bring him in, and even having a conversation with Dallas around the trade deadline, they were in on a linebacker. The Philadelphia Eagles were in on a cover linebacker. So all these teams that came up empty-handed by the around the trade deadline are pretty much in on Leonard now.
Nakobe Dean gets hurt in Philadelphia. They've been searching for pieces there since training camp. And with the Cowboys, they figured out a solution with Marquise Bell coming in and doing a really good job in some of these coverage situations, but they're still really thin on early downs. Their roster construction is unique, to say the least, by necessity because of some of the injuries that they've endured there. So just bringing in another body to give them a little bit more flexibility in some of these situations, I think makes a ton of sense for Dallas, and to an extent makes a little bit of sense for Philadelphia. So him landing in one of those two spots, not the least bit surprising. Let's finish this off with another kind of big question when it comes to injuries and who's going to fill in some of these moments. Dorian Thompson-Robinson gets hurt last week against the Broncos. Now some questions about who's going to be the starter for the Browns moving forward. Who do we think this is going to be if DTR is out? And does it look like it's going to end up being Joe Flacco?
Yeah, let's first talk about DTR and the concussion protocol. It's tough to get out of it in a week. We saw Brock Purdy do it on a short week. He was the only one this season that was able to come back, but most of the time teams are operating like as if he won't be available. I do believe that this is a week that we could see Joe Flacco. Obviously we know he was brought in last week, and this would be an opportune time for him to go out there if DTR can't go. The Flacco situation is really difficult to evaluate right now, because there were times when I know when he was with the Jets, I just remember being on the sideline and assistant coaches being like, he's still got it, man. He's good. And then, we saw what he did. He's limited. But I think I do think they believe he is a better option than, say, a PJ Walker at this time.
Yeah, they've just really struggled to move the ball all season as they've dealt with these quarterback injuries. So I wouldn't blame them for looking for a slightly different answer than the ones they've tried to tap into. More concerning, in my opinion, is what's going to happen with Myles Garrett after suffering that shoulder injury. He said after the game on Sunday that he felt something pop there. He was in a sling talking to reporters. What is the latest on Myles Garrett's health and what this could look like moving forward?
Yeah, it's fine. Not funny, but I talked to someone close to him the night of the game to kind of get a sense of where they're at in terms of his approach to this and where they're at in their season and how he's handled injuries, because he's got a bunch right now. Now, first of all, the good news is they expect him to play on Sunday. They're going to slowly bring him back this week, but the expectation is he'll be able to play against the Rams. However, he has been the leader in the locker room in telling these players that they have to play through a lot of these injuries, that they have to try to find a way and not let those things hold him back. And I think he is one of those. He's going to walk the walk if he's going to talk the talk types. So he actually even shared it after the game. And I think in recent media opportunities, he has said he's going to try to be out there no matter what. And he backs that up.
With all the questions at quarterback, with all the questions they've had on offense, they need that defense to carry them if they're going to do anything, if they get into the playoffs. And he is obviously the biggest part of that. So something to monitor for sure. Dianna Russini, thank you very much for the time. Always great to chat with you. I hope you enjoyed your meal at Boston Market. We will talk to you next week.
Yeah, I'm going to go throw up now. Thanks, Robert.